Apologies. 5 reasons why we need to restructure your retention schedule. Number 1 is because we have to automate the record keeping, which I'll try to prove to you in a moment that we must automate it. And you have to use, of course, one of these 5 products for your SharePoint. These are 5 record keeping software products. Number 2 is no matter which of the 5 software products you buy, it will force you to specify which records are case records and which are not. I'll explain that too. And the retention schedule will drive the SharePoint information architecture, which means what sites, what libraries, what metadata. Your retention schedule category, which I mean is a record series or business activity, will become a library or storage location in SharePoint. Reason number 4 is the record software, again, no matter which of the 5 you purchase, will need content rules. If you don't know what a content rule is, well, you're in the right place. We'll be covering that. 5th and final reason is the way people use SharePoint will drive certain things in the retention schedule. You'll see that shortly. We'll cover that. So those are the 5 reasons why you need to restructure your retention schedule. But one way or the other, you cannot use these software products unless you get your retention schedule into the software. So look at it this way. In a typical 1,000 user EDRMS, there are typically 12 records per person per day flowing into it. That's a flow rate of 12,000 records a day. Think about that. If you want to do anything with those 12,000, check it, classify it, do anything with it, that would equate to 12,000 minutes minimum. That's 25 days of work. So what does that mean? That means that you as a records manager have no hope whatsoever of intervening, touching, correcting, doing anything with these records. There's too many per day. What does that mean? Well, that means we can't rely on end users to declare and classify because it's got to be right, because you cannot correct it if it's wrong. Then from that, we can conclude that, okay, the only way we can make this happen is through automation, which is true. And now that we know we have to automate, that means that the retention schedule is going to have to be read and understood by a machine, not by a human. So the conclusion is we now need a retention schedule that is machine readable and will never be seen or used by end users. So let's go through each of these 5 reasons. First, the need for automation. 12,000 records a day, 2.7 million a year. There's no way you can intervene with that. So it has to be done properly each and every day. And compliance means that you can do a disposition. It means that every single document in SharePoint adheres to the retention schedule, right? So you know what I know, which is if we take one document and show it to 10 users and ask them, is this a record? Or worse yet, ask them how to classify it against the retention schedule, we'll get 10 different answers. And if we repeat it again a week or 2 later, you'll get different answers still, right? You know that. So 2 schools of thought. Number 1, compliance comes from end users. They have a responsibility to manage their records. That's school of thought number 1. School of thought number 2 is, wait a minute, that's not going to work. We need to impose compliance on end users. If a user thinks this document should be kept for 5 years, but the retention rules says 10 from the retention schedule, well, too bad. It's imposed. We're not asking you what you think it should be. We're telling you what it will be. Of those 2 schools of thought, the one where compliance comes from users just doesn't work. Therefore, we have no choice but to automate, okay? So now we're going to use one of those 5 software products to automate. But guess what? That's not going to work without a software-ready retention schedule, okay? Because the software needs the retention schedule in a certain format, certain structure in order to work, okay? We need to leverage metadata. We have to have explicit case structure. And we're going to have 2 species of rules, retention rules and these mysterious new content rules. So a modern software-ready retention schedule will go directly into the spreadsheet, And it is different in that you now can apply retention based on the value of records. We couldn't do that before because we didn't have that level of granularity. So now we can have, for one business activity, we can say, these are the highest value records, these are the medium value records, these are the low value records, and we can assign different retention rules on each. You have to know what a case is. You must know what a case is because all records are either case records or they're not, and the software treats them differently. So we're going to automate this completely, okay? So it has to be in a spreadsheet format, no more Word documents. It has to explicitly specify which of our record series or activities are case or not. We will allow multiple retention rules per category, and we have to create two species or types of rules, retention rules and these new content rules. Content rules are unique to the software. Here's a look at an old-fashioned retention schedule. It's actually currently in use, but it's very typical, okay? And it has codes that have been the same for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We've got to go away from that, and this is what we need. We need two types or two categories of data in your retention schedule. Data about each activity. Here you see one row per activity. And down here, we need one row per content rule, whatever the heck a content rule is. We'll cover that in a minute, okay? So this is the structure that we need. So here's an example from the west coast of Canada. This is a municipal retention schedule, and it's very typical. Again, these codes are old-fashioned records codes. Nothing wrong with that in the old days. But now we find three problems. Number one is this was written by humans under the expectation that a human will read it, interpret it, and act on it. But those days are gone. It's not going to happen. So now what we need is this, which is an excerpt from that retention schedule. Here you see buildings, facilities, and property acquisitions. That can't look like this anymore. Instead, it has to look like this. This is the heart of it right here in red. These are four content rules which the software can execute. These are machine readable rules that the software can act on and make sure that everything in that category acquisitions gets the appropriate retention rule. We'll see how we do that in a minute. Now, not favoring any one of the 5 products, believe me, I'm not, but this is an example from Microsoft's Purview. This is what the retention schedule looks like inside Purview. And as you can see from these headings, it's not what we're used to. Okay, it's close, but not quite the same. So every one of these 5 software products has a different requirement and structure for the retention schedule. Okay, and I want to bring your attention to this. When you want to create a new category in Purview, you don't say create a new category. You say create a label. What's a label? It's a retention rule. So every one of the 5 products is different, but the retention schedule must fit. And every product has a different fit. Okay, that's the automation. Number 2, case records. All records are either case records or they're not. I don't care who you are, but I guarantee you 60% or more of all your records are case records. All a case record is it's records about people, places, events, or things. Now, the problem with case records are that most records professionals don't truly understand them. They have a profound, and I mean profound, effect on how SharePoint is structured. And the record software uses different calculations to compute disposition, whether it's a case or non-case. So you don't have a choice here. You absolutely don't have a choice. You have to specify every single record must present itself to the software as a case record or a non-case record. There's just no choice. So as I said, case records are about a person. It's really case activities or categories. So if the activity is a series of repeated adventures, each adventure being a case, and each adventure generates records unique to that case. For example, we might have projects. You might do 6 projects in a year. Each project
Bruce, just unmute yourself. I accidentally muted you. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, no problem, Steve. I'll just repeat that. So case activities are a series of repeated adventures, and each adventure has a start and an end to it. For example, audits or projects. You do an audit in January for health and safety, a set of records unique to that audit. Then you do another audit in May, and it's about financial statements. Totally different audit. 2 different sets of records. The records are not related to each other, but each adventure has a different end date. So case records are those that are generated by case activities, and each activity is a case which has a unique ending date. And the ending date of the adventure triggers the retention rule. So 3-part rule: trigger, retention period, and an action at the end of the life. Okay? And the disposition, the software, the disposition process in the software will destroy all the records together as a group, not individual documents, versus admin records, which are the opposite. Like I said, it's black and white. All records are either case or not. So these are ongoing business activities that have no rhythm to it. They don't start and stop as different adventures and groups of related records. That doesn't go on. It's just a steady flow of records, okay, no matter what that flow may be. So how does the software calculate disposition? Well, it's triggered by the age. So the software says, take today's date, subtract the document's date from it. That gives the age. Then it compares the age to the retention period. And then if it's younger, it keeps it. If it's older, then it's eligible for disposition. Okay? So the trigger for the retention period is the document's date. Okay? So you got to realize that when you put your retention schedule into any one of these 5, you have to specify which type it is. Okay? What is this, a case activity or a non-case? And here are the 2 algorithms that I just described. So in a typical 1,000-person organization in my world, that would yield typically about 800 categories. Every one of those 800, you had to specify, is it a case category or not? So this is what the retention schedule looks like, a modern retention schedule, which we will cover in a few minutes. I just wanted to bring your attention to this. Every row in this spreadsheet is one category, and you must specify case, yes or no. There's no way around that. All 5 products, same thing. And by the way, feel free to put any questions in the chat. We'll be looking at the chat as we go. All right. Reason number 3 is the retention schedule has a pretty big impact on the SharePoint information architecture. This is the way it works. Imagine you're making a 3-layer cake. The bottom layer is the retention schedule. Let's use our example again of 800 categories. 60% of them would be case categories. So there's 480 on the right and 320 on the left. And the 480 on the right, the retention rules are applied to the cases, collections of related records, whereas on the left, the retention rule is applied to individual documents. Let's move up a level to SharePoint. Each one of these categories becomes a storage location known as a library in SharePoint. Not only that, but each library has a unique set of descriptive metadata unique to that activity. So we're going to have 800 libraries. Of those 800 libraries in SharePoint, 480 will be on the right, which will be subdivided into document sets, which is a case, a collection of related documents with a unique ending date. 320 libraries on the left will not be subdivided into doc sets. Okay? So what's this thing on the top? Well, that's why you're here. On the top, rules based record keeping. That's just my acronym for it. Up here are your retention rules and your content rules. Remember, two species of rules, not one. There's some examples here. If the library is safety audits and the retention, then apply the retention rule 5 years to it. But it might also say something like this, which is if the library is operator rounds and the field approved contains yes, then apply this rule to it. Okay. So you're having retention rules, which are the three-part rules, trigger, period, and action. And you have content rules, which say, what content in SharePoint shall I apply this particular retention rule to? Okay. So lots of these rules, and these rules execute 24 hours a day relentlessly. So every single day, the record software is polling each of these 800 libraries and looking and examining if those conditions are met. And if they are, then they reach disposition. So once you're done with those rules, this is the effect it has. The rules contain the names of the libraries and the metadata fields, meaning that if you change the name of a library or a metadata column in SharePoint, the rule breaks. You're no longer compliant, right? So it has the effect of locking together all three layers of the architecture like Lego blocks tightly. You can't separate them. Don't mess with it once it works, okay? Because these rules at the top are what makes the whole thing work. Now, reason number 5 is that the record software, again, all 5, same thing, they need content rules. You must know what content rules are because, as I said, there are two species of rules, retention rules and content rules. So let's cover both of them. Retention rule has 3 parts, a trigger, a retention period, and a disposition action, okay? They can have different types of triggers. This example here is an age or time-based trigger. So the trigger is the metadata column called document date. The metadata trigger can be any metadata field whatsoever, as long as it's a date field. It can be the date approved, the date received, whatever. And that triggers the retention. And then you have event triggered, the end of the audit, the end of the investigation, the termination of the employment, plus X years and delete. Okay? So you have 3 parts to the retention rule. Okay? Now, this slide is in the wrong place. I apologize. Here we go. So here we have an example of 15 retention rules, and they're sorted by activity, but each retention rule has a code because they're all unique. So you can see here that the same retention rule is applied across different multiple activities, which is totally normal, right? Over here, we take the same activities, but this time we sort by the rule code, and we see that rule number 1, keep 5 years and delete, is used in 3 of those activities. So bottom line is that among these 15 activities, they're only using 5 unique retention rules. So in my example of 800 categories, 1,000 users, we typically might see, about 50, maybe 75 unique retention rules, but that's it. Okay, that's it. Now, what are these content rules? Well, a content rule is something you have to create in the record software, and it says, for this content, apply this retention rule. So there are 3 parts to a content rule: a name, a condition, and a retention rule. So the condition has to be met in order to apply that retention rule. So here's an example from an audits library. If the library name is audits and the column or metadata field final report contains yes, then we want this retention rule applied to it, whatever that means. Audits final report. Let's pretend it's a 25-year retention rule. You see, each retention rule has a name, and this is the name of it. Each content rule has a name, right? So in this case, what we're doing is we're saying, you know what? There could be 1,000 records in a given audit case, but the final report has a higher retention value of 25 years. What about the other 999 records? Well, we can get rid of them in 2 or 3 years. So how do we identify the final report from the other 999? Answer, create a metadata field column called final report. It's a yes or no field, defaulted to no. When that one document is ready, someone will put it in there, say final report is yes, that will get that retention rule of 25 years. But all the other 999 will get the shorter retention rule. Okay? Now, an even more interesting example is down below in projects. If the library name is projects, well, projects tend to have a lot of records, could be in the thousands. So most SharePoint deployments will have a field, a column called document type for planning, engineering, legal, permits, what have you. And you can assign a different retention rule depending on the type of document. For example, drawings. Well, draft drawings, maybe keep them for the life of the project. But once the project is built, be it a bridge, a building, could be anything, then the final drawings generally are kept permanently, right? So you want to be able to assign a different retention rule to different content. And that's how we do it in this particular library. So each of the document types can have a different retention rule. Notice that planning documents and legal documents both have the same rule, right? It doesn't have to be different for each one. Now, this is what I call the beating heart of a modern EDRMS system. It's the matchup between the content rules and the retention rules. This is the heart and soul of the project. You have to build these content rules, or there's nothing the software can do for you. Okay? Most records managers who don't fully understand the record software make this mistake, innocent mistake. They say, oh, I have a retention schedule with 200 categories in it. And in that retention schedule, there are probably 50 unique retention rules. So all I have to put into the record software are those 50 rules. No, no. You have to put the 50 in there, all right. But the average number of content rules per category in a healthy EDRMS is 3. What does that mean? Well, if you, in fact, have 200 categories in your retention schedule, I guarantee you don't. In SharePoint, you're going to need more like 600 to 800, okay? Most, in fact, I'll say all retention schedules I've ever met in my life are deficient. They don't have enough activities in them because they don't understand that they need the level of granularity that matches the number of unique things that go on in the business. So if you bring me a 200 uh, category retention schedule, give me 10 minutes. And typically, I'll convince you that it's 1/3 to 1/4 as big as it needs to be. Anyway, if in fact you do have 800 real categories, then you're going to need to create 2,400 content rules. Yeah, you are. Now, the content rules are all in all 5 products. They don't fall out of the sky. You have to build them. And each product calls them a different name. Only Collabware actually calls them content rules, but I think that's the best name because it's generic. Purview, for example, calls them auto apply policies. So in this example, we've got library audits, final report, yes. It calls retention rule number 7, which is audit end date plus 10 years and destroy. What about the others where final report is no? That's rule 5, comma destroy, rule number 1, which is keep 5 years and destroy. Okay? So you can do this over and over and over for all your 800 libraries, and you'll typically end up with 3 content rules per library. Okay? Now, in the old days of paper, we only had 1 retention rule per category. That's because we couldn't open a box or dig into the detail, and we never had any metadata. Now we have all this metadata, all this knowledge of all our records. So the software is written to take full advantage of that, right? Hence, Now you have an unlimited number of retention rules per category. Unlimited. You can slice and dice it as granular as you need, okay? Which is important. So here are some examples of some content rules, or I should say examples of software that obligate you to type in content rules. This is Collabware, and you notice each one of these tabs. Look at this tab. It's called Content Rules. And you can see the conditions right here, right? If I go back to this table for a minute, a condition has a SharePoint element and then an operator, a Boolean operator equal to, greater than, less than, and then a value, yes, no, planning, technical, what have you. So here they have an example of a SharePoint column called department. The operator must be equal to, and the value, administration. So if that condition is met, then you apply retention rule X, whatever that retention rule may be. This is an example from Gimmal. You can see, again, the same pattern. The property, which is the SharePoint metadata column, operator, value. They even have a data type. And you can join multiple rules together. So you can say, okay, this condition has been met as well as this condition down here. Okay? And you can keep building and building and building. This is from a product called Opus from a company by the name of AvePoint. Opus is the name of their record software. So here you can see that they say in this screen form, they say apply term by. What's a term? A term is what they call a retention rule. Remember, two rule types. Retention rules are short, sweet, simple, easy, and few in number. Keep 5 years and destroy. That's a retention rule. End of story. They call them terms. So here they're saying auto-populate a term based on criteria. The criteria is the content rule. Between the if here and the then there, everything between here is your content rule. What happens after the then? Well, apply the following term. Pick from the list of retention rules and apply it to that content, right? So this is just a demonstration from the company of what they could do in a content rule. So again, you'll see the same pattern. Here they have a name field must contain the name test, a column called approved must equal or contain yes, a column approved by must match with the name Smith. And you can get into much, much more detail. That's way more than we need here typically, but you get the point, which is the content rule specifies what content in SharePoint will we apply this retention rule to. Okay. Now here's what a content rule looks like in Purview. Purview calls their rules auto apply policies. On the top of the screen here is the wizard, a summary of the wizard you have to fill out. And I know this is way too small to see, but I couldn't really make it much bigger. It says apply label to content that contains specific words or phrases or properties. We want properties. We don't want content. Why not? Because content is unpredictable, especially in email. So we want properties that we can depend upon. What's a property? Metadata, which are called columns in SharePoint, right? So we're going to choose a label to auto apply. A label is the retention rule. That's your small set of 50, 75 retention rules to what content? Well, see this box here? That's the box you fill in to specify what content you're going to apply that retention rule to. And this is a live example from an actual working system. Here's the condition. Refinable string 45 equals audits, and refinable string 00 equals reports. That's what you have to type into this content rule. So the refinable string 45 means library. The operator is equal. The value is audits. And refinable string 00 is the column. In this particular case, the column is document type, and then the operator is equals, and the value is reports. So for for every document in SharePoint that meets this criteria, you will apply this label, which is called safety audits, which is 10 years, review and delete, to that content. So day in, day out, 24 hours a day, every single day, something goes into SharePoint. Any document that meets that criteria will end up with that label on it. Now, what the heck is a refinable string? Well, that's part of the KQL programming language. It's called a keyword query language. But you have to learn that in order to type in the content rules. So it's a little more complicated with Purview. You have to learn more, for sure, but the concept is still the same. You're saying these documents in this location in SharePoint that meet these criteria, apply this rule to it. So no matter what product you buy, you're doing the same thing. You're just doing it differently. Now, to get back to the retention schedule, well, the retention schedule, it's supposed to show our retention rules. Yeah, but this is the modern era. Not only do we have retention rules, but now we got to specify what content we're going to apply the rules to. True? So the retention schedule needs both. It needs the content rules, which I'm showing here in yellow, and the retention rules in purple. The content rules call for the retention rules in purple. Okay, so here we have a library for control room operations, and the content rule says if the column continuous overwrite contains yes, then run retention rule RRN1, which says last modified date 5 years after last modified date, then destroy it. Okay. I won't get into any other examples in this. I have other examples coming up. Now, reason number 4, SharePoint usage is going to influence your retention schedule. In other words, back in the other direction now. How so? It's the way in which people use libraries. Remember, a library is an activity. But here's the rub. Some activities are done by one business unit and only one business unit, and nobody else participates in it. We call those local activities. A common activity, however, occurs when you have multiple business units that participate in the same activity, like let's say expense claims. But, and this is a big but, different business units don't want the other business units to know what they're up to. They don't want to share them, let alone fool around with their expense claims. So what do you do there? Well, it's the same activity, same library, but you duplicate it for each business unit that needs expense claims. So you end up, if you have, let's say, 50 business units, you end up with 50 identical libraries. Okay? And nobody can stick their fingers in anyone else's business. But all 50 libraries for expense reports are identical. They just have different sets of records in each one. Same metadata, same behavior, and same retention rule. Shared is the opposite of common. Shared says we're going to have one library for this activity, and everybody is going to go in there and trust each other, and everybody can delete anyone else's documents, edit anyone else's document, and add their own documents. That's a pretty high level of trust, but it happens. So that's what the shared behavior is. So we call that a mode. Here's how it looks. Here we have 4 business units, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each have 4 activities or categories. They're all locals. Here, BU2, the research group, has an activity called Common 6. And that activity is also done by BUs 3 and 4. So they each have their own copy of that library and their own independent records. So there's now 3 piles of records for that activity called Common 6. That's what common is, a duplicate library, okay? Meanwhile, BU2 has a shared library, and they've invited BU1 in to play with them in there. Very high level of trust. So now 2 business units are putting records in the same library and sharing it with each other. Okay? And the owner of that library, BU2, can will have elevated permissions in SharePoint so they can invite other business units in and boot out business units that maybe misbehave. Who knows? So now let's look at an actual retention schedule. There are two parts that I'm going to show you. One part are the activities, one row per activity. The second part I'm going to show you are the content rules and the retention rules. Okay? That's the essence of a modern software-ready retention schedule. The activities, the content rules, and the retention rules. You have to have all three. Okay? So rather than show you the slide, because I don't think you'll necessarily be able to read them on the webinar over the screen, so I'm going to load up the actual spreadsheet where I can magnify it so you can see it. I'm hoping that this is big enough for you to see. So from left to right, this is the activities portion, and one row per activity or category. So here we have the activity is audio-visual solutions. This is the description. This is the mode. Remember the mode? The mode is common, local, or shared. And yes, the retention schedule has to specify that because if it doesn't, how are we going to know how to deploy that in SharePoint? We won't know, right? So it's a local one, meaning one copy of that library only. And it is a case structure, which means there will be one case for every solution. Moving further to the right, or I got a little ahead of myself. The every category has to have a unique code and a name. But for now, I'm just going to focus on the code. Existing retention schedules have unique codes, but it has to be unique, okay? And so the software can tell one activity from another. So this is the code for that particular category. Now, moving to the right, we have the retention rules, which isn't important at the moment. That's just for convenience. These fields right here are pretty standard for any retention schedule. Is this category vital or not? Is it a public record? Does it contain personally identifiable information, sensitive data, information protection level? These are all pretty standard stuff of any reasonable retention schedule. Do we need a review before disposition? Does it have archival value, and what business unit is primarily responsible for it? And does it form a PIB, a personal information bank? I'm not going to explain any of these because any records manager will understand them. They're all typical of a modern retention schedule. Same for citations. If the activity has a legal citation that drives the retention, then it'll occur in a separate tab, which I'm not showing you today, which is a list of the citations, and then the citation number will show up here. Similarly, if you have a state or federal archive that requires you to review with archives before you're allowed to dispose of it, then they might grant you a code which you have to record and track so that they can review it. A lot of optional stuff there. But what matters for an EDRMS, what's new to you is the mode, the code, the case structure, the case naming convention, which is how are we going to call those cases? And there's a little bit of different behavior for these, but we won't get into that today. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. So we would have, in our example, 800 of these. Now, let's go over here to the other part, which is the rules. Now, remember, I'm going to bring up this slide again, just to be sure we all fully understand this. There are two sets of rules, content rules and retention rules. Content rules consume retention rules. You have 2,400 content rules, typically, and 50 retention rules. And each content rule specifies which content to apply which retention rule to. Okay? And each activity has to specify a minimum one content rule, obviously, right? What are we going to do with the stuff in this library? Well, the only way to deal with that is to create a content rule. So let's look up an example here. I'm going to go for audits. Now, notice right here in audits, this is the code unique to the audits activity, com audits 1. That was machine generated. So that's going to link to the content rule over here in this worksheet. So I'm going to go and I'm going to look up the code, com audits 1. Com audits 1. This is a very large spreadsheet, so here it is here. Com audits 1. So look at this. I have two rules for that, two content rules. Content rules in yellow, retention rules in purple. And here they are. So here I have field, final report, operator equals value. Yes, this is the final report. It has a longer retention rule. Which retention rule? Number 77, which says the document's age, wait 25 years, and then get rid of it. Okay? What about all the other 999 where final report equals no? We're going to use retention rule 66, which says end of the audit plus 5 years, then get rid of it. It's not as high value, right? So that's how it works. Pretty straightforward, but you've got to have the time and the patience to create these rules. Now, there's more detail I'm not covering, like the priority of rules. Some of the 5 software products allow you to specify a priority, and some don't. There are differences in syntax, language, and capability between all the 5 products. But the principles I'm showing you today are universal, okay? They're absolutely universal to all 5 products. So what we do is we've come up with some tools to help facilitate EDRMS deployment. This is what you need to know. There are 6 steps that it takes to deploy any EDRMS regardless of brand. Number 1, define a new/different retention schedule. That's what we've done today. 2, produce it, generate it. 3, feed it into the record software. 4, come up with all the metadata necessary to support that retention schedule. Typically, in a healthy EDRMS, that's 14 metadata columns per library, which would be 11,200 column mappings. That could take you a year. Then step 5 is once you've decided in a spreadsheet what that IA needs to be, hand it over to IT and say, go build it. You're not too busy this afternoon, are you? That could take another year. And then when all that is done, you've got your retention schedule, it's loaded into your software, you've built out the SharePoint, and it's all built. Now, and only now, can you type in your 2400 content rules. Why? Why do you have to wait till the end? Because the rules specify the metadata and the library names. So this has to exist and be complete before you can do these content rules, right? So fortunately, we've done this so many times that we came up with some tools, we call them catalysts. And this step here, which typically takes a year or so, we can do it with this catalyst in a day or so, versus a year or so. And in a future version that we're working on now, we're also going to generate the content rules, which, by the way, can take you easily 10 to 15 minutes per rule. Try doing the math on that and calculate how long that's going to take you, right? So manually, this could take you months. It will not take you days. It will not take you weeks. It will take you many months, okay? So we're going to reduce that down to a day or so as well. All right. Okay. So that's it for me. Does anyone have any questions or clarification that I can help you with? No questions, no comments? Okay. Well, thank you for attending. And oh, here we go. Yes, good point, which is there's a lot of detail in this. And you know what? That's why I think that most EDRMS projects to date, anyway, have been failures. It's because nobody knows what they're really getting into. You've got to know what you're getting into. You've got to plan the time for it. You've got to put in the effort, make that retention schedule proper so the software can do its job. All right, we'll terminate at that. And tomorrow, this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, which is shown right here. Right here. This is the address to the YouTube channel right here if you want to check out the recording or share it with others. So that's what you can do. If you missed any part of this or you want to repeat it or share it, just go to the YouTube tomorrow and it'll be there. There's a section in the YouTube channel called webinars. Just look it up there. Okay. Again, thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Good luck with your EDRMS and be sure to be prepared to build yourself a new retention schedule. Thank you very much.